Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin. Sorry I'm a couple of minutes late. Ah, well, we've pretty much dug out from the big storm of 2 days ago, in which we spent the night in no heat, 30 degrees. It was a night to get all the blankets out, but things are coming back to normal now. But apologize, I was running around this morning and got a little late. I know that's nothing new, right? Let's go back to comments and say hello. Hello, David, Conundrum, Shouts, Jay, and Christy. Good morning, Ospreys, and thanks for being part of the Screaming Ospreys. Appreciate everyone checking out screamingospreys.com. We had a bit of an outage over the holidays. We got hit by some type of an attack, and but Jumping Mouse has fixed us all up, and we're back up and running at screamingospreys.com. All right, Baker. Well, oh, I guess I'm more apologizing for the fact that I'm just kind of a little bit out of breath before I sat down here. So anyway, it's all good. I am starting this new series, and because I was excited about it yesterday, I thought I'm going to continue it today. I will also be doing an 8 o'clock tonight, of course, with the great David Cranmer Underdown, who will give us some more amazing connections between the elite families of this country and the corporate world, where I think all of this stuff happens in now at this point. The corporate world, it's a takeover of the world by a corporate form of government. Fascism is one way to put it. But what is synarchy and why am I so excited about it? Well, because it tells me who George P. Schultz is finally. He's a synarchist, the um, opposite number of my father at Loomis Chaffee School in Windsor, Connecticut, class of 1938. And he went on to become rich and famous and also participate in a lot of very, very ugly things. Why? Well, I think he has a philosophy, rest in peace, he had a philosophy that is in a line with um, the dark side of humanity. If you believe that humans are essentially bad, then it follows from that that you need to control them, right? And so that's what we're doing here is we're trying to find out who is behind the crazy activities of our lifetimes, from 9/11 to the Vietnam War, the assassination of Kennedy, the election of 2019. Everything seems to have been orchestrated by something behind the scenes. And fascism itself doesn't do it because we also have Nazism to deal with. And we do believe that there are Nazis alive today that are exerting that philosophy without admitting it, being uh, white Anglo-Saxon racists and people that want to have the white Nordic Aryan race succeed in dominating, eliminating, or controlling in some way everybody else on the planet. That is Nazism, National Socialism, socialism based upon the nation. It's a nationalist form of communism, is the easiest way to put it. So now you see that communism and Nazism are the opposite sides of the same coin. It's all totalitarian, no matter which way you call it. And the elites of communism represent the same people as the kings and emperors of old Western Europe. Now, in America, we have our own upper class, the aristocracy, the ones that intermarry into their own selves, just like the old Egyptians did, to not defile the race. They have this idea of themselves as a superior race. And they got great writers, how Nietzsche, he could write a lot. Even though he had syphilis, he could still write pretty good. And, the ideas are crazy. They're just plain crazy, unless you accept the first proposition, and that is mankind is essentially evil. Now, I take the opposite view. I think mankind is essentially good. And I think that we, as people who have developed at least some sense of reason, some sense of history, some sense of understanding the technological material that we work with, understanding reality, in other words, in a broader sense, I think we understand that, first of all, I have to say there's a power greater than me that I don't understand what it is, and I call it God. And that's the easiest way for me to explain that I don't think God, the creator of all this, made a bunch of crap. I think he did what he could do to make us into um, a good world, a good universe, a good something positive. Why would God make a bunch of evil beings? Well, that's a philosophical question that I'm not going to address because I don't believe it. Welcome, RT3 from Podunk, and hello from Birmingham. Wow, there's no ham like Birmingham. As Anyway, that's an old witticism from a long, long time ago. No ham like Birmingham. So let's get into it then. Here's what I'm trying to say in a nutshell. Nazism was a national form of totalitarian control by an elite few. Communism is an international form of the same thing. Synarchism, or synarchy, is the kind of behind the scenes power that comes from really the Austro-Hungarian Empire and their idea of an empire that consists of all kinds of different parts, different languages, different cultures, different races, different habits, different skin colors, even to some extent different religions. And that is the broader form of socialism that we call, in some ways, it's like communism, but it's run by a secret elite that are actually capitalists and have made tons and tons of money already. And this is the Bilderbergers and the Trilateral Commission and the people that Henry Kissinger uh, works for. You live by the Henry Ford Museum. Wow. Tom, our a great Osprey, Tom G, sent me or gave me some Henry Ford materials, which are really, really quite useful in distinguishing what he really thought from what people say he thought. But boy, that Ford Foundation has turned into a monster. So let me get back to where we were. We're talking about an article in EIR, that is Executive Intelligence Review, February 4th, 2005, by Alan Douglas, who is reviewing a book by Jack Green and Alessandro Massignani called The Black Prince and the Sea Devils, the story of Valerio Borghese and the elite units of the Decima Mas. The Decima Mas was a anti-submarine warfare unit created under Mussolini by Prince Borghese, and he is, of course, one of uh, the ancient families of Venice, northern Italy. Actually, Borghese was from Rome. I misspoke, but they're connected in that way. So he was a daring do guy that's with his, for instance, he used human powered or human driven torpedoes. And you imagine that takes some courage, right? To run a torpedo right up into the side of a British warship and blow it up. But he did that. Now, to go back, let's just review this one first paragraph. The career of the Roman Black Prince, Junio Valerio Borghese, don't mix Spanish with Italian, gruesomely illustrates how virtually all modern international terrorism and all assassinations of heads of state and government, such as President Kennedy, former Italian Prime Minister Aldo Moro, or the numerous attempts at France's President Charles de Gaulle, derive from the post-war Nazi International, sponsored by the Anglo-American-led Synarchy and its intelligence services. To trace the ramifications of that career, that is the Black Prince or Borghese, is to open a door onto the centuries-old highest level of the financial oligarchy, the Synarchy, the aristocratic families of the black nobility, the sovereign military order of the Knights of Malta, and the heirs of what Pope John Paul I called the Ancients of Venice. So now I think you have an idea that this is in the area of from Rome north and including into Austria, and from there into France, and certainly in Switzerland, although that's not documented in what I have read so far, but Switzerland would certainly be part of it. Okay, so we have read about Gladio and the Stay Behind network, and now we can associate that with this movement called Synarchy. They're not racists. They are instead simply oligarchical elitists, and they're not going to check your Aryan grandparents, to make sure that you qualify, like the Knights of Malta would. Now, the Knights of Malta would check not for your race, but for your aristocratic heritage. You could be a aristocrat and not necessarily be a Prussian, in other words. And these aristocrats from Rome certainly were not Prussians. And the whole Austro-Hungarian Empire was based on a kind of acceptance, as I said before, of people that are not of that same Aryan stature that the Nazis insisted upon. Well, we talked through some about the OSS and the Decima Mas and how they became a terrorist group in Italy after the war, working for the Synarchy. A universal fascist, in other words. Now that's the essence of it, that it's fascism projected universally across the entire world. That's what they want. And they want a very small population, too, compared to what we have now. So we read about NATO and Gladio and international terrorism. We have let's see, where did I stop? I'm sorry, I lost my place. Hang in there a second, please. Okay, so we were talking about how this plan that involves NATO, Operation Gladio, uh, and they called it Operation Demagnetize, in which the CIA and the military secret services tried to reduce the magnetic attraction of the communist parties of Italy and France. And we left off with the admission by the CIA that The French and Italian governments were not told about this operation because it is clear that it would interfere with their respective national sovereignties. So that's now we're back to the secret team and Fletcher Prouty's observation that these intelligence services that are action teams don't absorb and don't care about national sovereignty. They're working for something else. And now we can put a name on it. They're working for the Synarchy. So continuing here on page 58, EIR, February 4th, 2005. Operationally, the stay-behind units were run by the military secret services of each NATO nation, as directed by the CPC and ACC. Those are the initials for the Clandestine Planning Commission, clandestine, of course, and Allied Clandestine Committee, which were the interface between NATO and Allied Supreme Headquarters SHAPE in Europe. So the CPC and ACC were directing the Gladio units. Some light was shed on Pentagon and NATO thinking of this time in a Pentagon Field Manual, found along with a list of members of the elite Propaganda Due, or P2, Freemasonic Lodge in P2 Grandmaster Licio Gelli's villa in Arezzo, Tuscany in 1981. Although issued in 1970, Field Manual 3031B reflected earlier Pentagon and NATO planning. It emphasized that military and other Secret Service leaders in each country should be recruited as U.S. agents or NATO agents. Quote, the success of international stabilization operations, which are promoted in the context of strategies for internal defense by the U.S. Military Secret Service. U.S. Military Secret Service, right? Ever heard of that before? Depends on, to a large extent, on the understanding between the U.S. personnel and the personnel of the host country. The recruitment of senior members of the Secret Service of the host country as longtime agents is thus especially important. In other words, we're subverting everybody to NATO behind the scenes. Don't let anybody know. This process began in early 1944 to 45 when the Anglo-American Synarchists reconstructed Italy's military secret service and its military police, the Carabinieri. Some of the key individuals whom they installed or sponsored later turned up as members of P2, from where they oversaw the terrorism and assassinations of the late 1960s and 70s, as well as the cover-ups, like Borghese. Some of these leaders had been recruited by Angleton himself. One of them was Federico Umberto D'Amato, chief of the UAR, a secret section of the Interior Ministry which coordinated the terrorist actions under NATO direction, in conjunction with the military secret services. Furthermore, stated the FM 3031B, quote, there may be times when the host country governments show passivity or indecision in the face of communist subversion, and according to the interpretation of the U.S. Secret Services, do not react with sufficient effectiveness. Most often, such situations come about when the revolutionaries temporarily renounce the use of force and thus hope to gain an advantage, as the leaders of the host country wrongly consider the situation to be secure. U.S. Army intelligence must have the means of launching special operations which will convince host country governments and public opinion of the reality of the insurgent danger. So isn't that interesting that we now have Army intelligence fingered as the action arm when the host countries won't do anything? And that, of course, is the CIC, the Counterintelligence Corps of the Army. So helps to put, is it Army? Is it Navy? What is it? Is it CIA? Well, in this case, Army. Coup attempts against the Italian government under precisely the circumstances that are described by FM 30 to 31B were launched using Gladio personnel, including Borghese, that year, 1970, and three more times through 1974. The manual stressed, quote, these special operations must remain strictly secret. Only those persons who are acting against the revolutionary uprising shall know of the involvement of the U.S. Army in the internal affairs of an allied country. The fact that the involvement of forces of the U.S. military goes deeper shall not become known under any circumstances. Unquote. The British role. As in virtually everything to do with imperial strategies, the relevant U.S. circles were being carefully guided by their senior partners, the British, under the old rubric, quote, British brains and American brawn, unquote. Gladio was modeled on the actions of the Special Operations Executive, the SOE, behind enemy lines during World War II, which had been created by the British Ministry of Defense, the MOD, in 1940, under orders from Churchill to set Europe ablaze. In charge of the SOE was Minister of Economic Warfare Hugh Dalton. Hugh Dalton, any relation to Dalton School, I wonder, who said, we have to organize movements in enemy occupied territory comparable to the Sinn Féin movement in Ireland, to the Chinese guerrillas now operating against Japan, to the Spanish irregulars who played a notable part in Wellington's campaign, or one might as well admit it, to the organizations which the Nazis themselves have developed so remarkably in almost every country in the world. Unquote. The SOE was closed down at war's end and replaced by the Special Air Services, SAS, which helped Britain's Foreign Secret Service, the MI6, to train the stay-behind armies of Europe. Gladio specialist Danielle Ganzer of the Center for Security Studies at Zurich Technical University observed, quote, many within the stay-behind community regarded the British to be the best in the field of secret warfare, more experienced than the military officers of the U.S., unquote. The British set up a base for training stay-behind units at Fort Monkton outside Portsmouth, England, and another in Sardinia. One of the stay-behind operatives trained at Fort Monkton recalled, quote, we were made to do exercises going out in the dead of night and pretending to blow up trains in the railway station without the station master or the porters seeing you. We crept about and pretended to lay charges on the right part of the railway engine with a view to blowing it up. Unquote. In the Gladio coordinated blind terror which ravaged Italy from 1969 through 1980, trains and railway stations were to be a favorite target. Notably, the 1974 bombing of the Rome-Munich Italicus Express, which killed 12 and injured 48, and the explosion in the Bologna rail station in August 1980, which killed 85 and seriously injured or maimed 200. Lyndon LaRouche first emphasized within hours of the Madrid train bombings of March 11, 2001, which killed 200 and wounded thousands more, that they were not the work of Islamic terrorists, but followed the pattern of the 1980 Bologna bombing. You know, if you look at March 11th, 2001, in terms of numerology, you get 3, 1, 1, and then a 3. And if you take the first 3 and multiply it by the 11, then you get 33. And so that gives you a 333. And I think that's significant from a Kabbalistic point of view, as we were talking about Kabbalah last night. And I think this is the idea that somewhere behind all this, there is some access to the immortal, access to God, access to understanding God's plan. If you could only understand numerology better, yeah, it's insane. But all this stuff is insane. But we have to study it because that's what they're doing. They are imposing an insane system upon us based not in reason, but in pure serfdom, in an inability to see beyond tomorrow or to look back beyond yesterday, but to be stuck in the present and only able to do what we are told to obey. Vincenzo Vinciguerra, an Italian neo-fascist terrorist who was jailed for life and who had been bitter about the Secret Service's manipulation of neo-fascist groups ever since 1945, explained how Gladio and sister organizations worked. Quote, you had to attack civilians, the people, women, children, innocent people, unknown people far removed from any political game. The reason was quite simple. They were supposed to force these people, the Italian public, to turn to the state to ask for greater security. This is the political logic that lies behind all the massacres and the bombings, which remain unpunished because the state cannot convict itself or declare itself responsible for what happened. Let me take a second and suggest to you that the entire single shooter false flag series of events, between 9/11 and now, thinking especially of Sandy Hook and the heroic attempt of people like Wolfgang Halbig to expose it. But they're still out there soliciting money, you know, and people still buy it. And even though the Cuomos have gone down, and who was the major pusher of that story was Chris Cuomo. Same people, guys. It's the same people. It's the Synarchists. My opinion. I could be wrong. Hey, Professor here. Strategia della tensione. Yeah, indeed. That's what it is. The author of Hunger Games lives in Sandy Hook. Well, isn't that interesting? And you have a lot of creepy stuff around that school. I think is it Norwich, the insane asylum, where they probably did all kinds of horrible experiments, just like they did at Hartford Hospital up in Hartford, where my dad grew up. Connecticut. Man, what a horrible place to live. I'm sorry, guys. I know a lot of you love Connecticut and you've got it all worked out and everything's good for you. But for me, when I visited Connecticut, I felt like I was going into some type of a twilight zone. It seemed like my relatives were, you know, under surveillance. It seemed like everybody was under surveillance, and I think that Connecticut has been, you know, under the control of these deep state people. Maybe I should start calling them synarchists in order to make the term more popular. Okay. Yeah, Mark Kulak could probably be a good source since he's from Housatonic. But yeah, look into that guy with the funny. He sounds like R. Daniel. Remember the robot in iRobot? His name is I R. Daniel Olival, and this guy's name is Daniel something. It just reminds me of that robot. Maybe he's already been uh, chipped in his brain. Can't remember his last name, but his first name is Daniel, just like the robot. The Merritt Parkway is fun. We drove up, George and I did, when we went up to visit Loomis School and onward into New Rhode Island to visit with our good friends, the Horlicks, Tara and Dave. But the Merritt Parkway was built when my father was a young man, high school and college years, he spent doing construction work for the builders, and the actual architect that designed the Merritt Parkway lived in the O'Loughlin home. He was a man who was from New Jersey, but had apparently gotten connections and got the contract. I don't know how he ended up living in my ancestors' home back in the 30s, but he did. And of course, my father then learned how to do surveying while he was doing that job, as well as all kinds of different construction trades jobs. He was able to cut stone and use all the tools of road building. Okay, so I'm diverting a little bit, but Connecticut is a fascinating but frightening place to me. I'll just leave it there. Let's get back to the book. How would you define Synarchism? Okay, well, look it up on Wikipedia. You'll see what it means. And in the simplest form, it means government together. And what it actually transfers in modern terms is oligarchy. It is families. It is like the medieval feudal times where there's one person at the top who calls the shots, and then all of those dukes and lords and they all have their own pecking order, but at the top it's an oligarchy where they work together to keep the system going, to keep themselves financed, to keep the people from learning what's really going on. So we're working here to expose the synarchy, to expose these secret machinations of megalomania. How about that? The secret machinations of megalomaniacs. So the idea is that if the state does it, then the state cannot sue itself. You can't convict yourself of a crime, and you can't even declare responsibility for what happened because you have to keep it secret. After Prime Minister Giulio Andreotti exposed the existence of Gladio in 1990, the BBC's news edition undertook its own examination of Gladio. It reported in April 1991, quote, Britain's role in setting up stay-behinds throughout Europe was absolutely fundamental, unquote. More crucial than the stay-behinds were the secretive bodies which controlled them, such as P2, or the Propaganda Due, Masonic Lodge, which included members of the Roman Catholic Curia, the administration. Once again, you see the Masons and the Catholic hierarchy working together. Here, too, British led the way. Already in 1944 to 45, the British set up a proto-P2 Masonic Lodge composed of House of Savoy monarchists, aristocrats, and Mussolini loyalists. House of Savoy is the Italian royal house that was brought into power in the Italian revolutions of the 1860s. And Victor Emmanuel was the king back in the early 20th century. So that's the ruling family of Italy. They're from, of course, northern parts of Italy, and part obviously related to the black nobility. A January 2nd, 1945 OSS report notes, quote, the lodge is under British authority and will request their political and economic aid, things which the members cannot get through their respective parties without exposing themselves to accusations of being paid by the British. Okay, the next section turns to Italian theater, NATO's Italian theater, and James Jesus Angleton. OSS official James Jesus Angleton saved Borghese in 1945 and then set up the clandestine structure in the Italian military and secret services, which produced the Italian section of Gladio. Angleton was a devout Anglophile and a pro-fascist who had spent much of his boyhood in Italy, where his father, James Hugh Angleton, owned the Italian subsidiary of National Cash Register. The outspokenly pro-Hitler, pro-Mussolini senior Angleton also headed the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in Italy and had extensive contacts with Mussolini's intelligence services. Some accounts report that he was a business partner of Allen Dulles. Both he and his son were to work for the special counterespionage unit of OSS, the X2, which had been set up at the demand of the British. Though it was nominally an American organization, the headquarters of X2 for all of Europe and even most of the globe was London. X2 was trained and de facto run throughout the war by the British, as its operatives were dispatched across Europe. From late 1943 through the first half of 1944, Lieutenant Colonel James U. Angleton was X2's liaison to Marshal Pietro Badoglio and other leaders of the Italian army and to the Army's intelligence service, building up his excellent contacts in pre-war Italy. The junior Angleton landed in Italy as an X2 operative in October 1944. So let's make a note of that. Angleton's first operation is under British control. Angleton is an essential character in understanding what happened to my father, as well as what happened to our country. And here you find documented evidence that he was under British control as early as 1944. The other thing about Angleton that I always remember is he has the Habsburg jaw. He has that great big jaw like Jay Leno. And if you look up pictures of Habsburg jaw, you'll see all these ancient Habsburgs with the same jaw. To me, that tells me that he's part of the ancient aristocracy of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Habsburgs. Why did their jaws get enlarged and distended? Well, we're told it's because of inbreeding. Inbreeding, just like the pharaohs. Pardon me. So don't you just want to go out and scream bloody murder sometimes when you realize that incredible horror of letting these people to run our world? And that explains so much of why we've been, you know, unable to succeed, why we've been miserable, why our country seems to always fail, just like Charlie Brown keeps trying to kick that football that Lucy, the Luciferian Lucy, always pulls out at the last minute, and Charlie Brown ends up on his back saying what? Rats. Well, it's not inevitable that Americans turn out to be losers, especially since all this secret stuff has been exposed by many people, but I especially appreciate the efforts of Lyndon LaRouche and Jeffrey Steinberg, Harley Schlanger, Anton Chaikin, Alan Douglas, our author of this article here, and all the people at Executive Intelligence Review over the years who have just done amazing work to document and expose this stuff, even while they're being thrown in jail by none other than Robert Swan Mueller III. An amazing thing. And I love these folks, and I wish I could convince them that they're wrong on well, you know what I'm talking about, wrong on this pandemic. But so far, haven't been able to crack that wall. Other than that, though, I'm continue to have a wonderful relationship with him, and appreciate Harley Schlanger's uh, making time for us every 2 weeks right here, and he'll be back again next week right here at 11 a.m. on McDuff Lives. Okay, more into Angleton. The junior Angleton landed in Italy as an X2 operative in October 1944. Borghese was one of his informants from shortly thereafter, informant slash agents, until the Italian government demanded that the OSS turn him over for prosecution. The U.S. mandated that the operational resources of the Italian police and all the military intelligence and secret services be put at the disposal of X2, which was led by Angleton. This naturally set the pattern for decades to come. Bespeaking his patronage by Dulles and the British, young Angleton rose from chief of the X2 unit in Rome to chief of all OSS counter-espionage in Italy. By age 28, he was chief of all secret activity, intelligence as well as counterintelligence in Italy for the Strategic Services Unit, the short-lived successor to OSS and predecessor to the operational section of the CIA, which was established in 1947. In this, he was aided immensely by the fact that many patriotic OSS officers, such as Max Corvo, head of OSS operations in Italy from 1943 to 45, and later a friend of Lyndon LaRouche, had been purged by the Dulles faction the day after FDR's death. Okay, a note about that, two notes. First of all, Max Corvo is from Connecticut. Okay. And I have his book. He wrote a book of memoirs of the activities of the OSS in Sicily and Naples and in the war. And it's a remarkable thing to realize that not all of American stuff is working together. The Army has its own, intelligence people. The Navy is completely different. The Office of Naval Intelligence would certainly have been working with the Borghese Mamas anti-submarine unit during the war and would have kept contact with them. And then the OSS, a completely different operation, which Angleton now is shaping for the entire rest of the 20th century. And it's interesting that he became a friend of Lyndon LaRouche. Would love to know more about their relationship. But I'm just going to give you this right now about Max Corvo because I don't know where else to stick it and I want to share it with you. Max Corvo was not working with Luciano. The whole Luciano thing, and you've heard the story about how lucky Luciano, who was so unlucky as to get convicted of running a uh, a brothel and exploiting young women, which was the only thing they could catch him on. Of course, he was doing everything else too. But he was in jail for a long sentence, courtesy of Thomas A. Dewey. And then during the war, there was this negotiation. I won't tell the whole story, but he ends up supposedly going to Italy with a handkerchief, a fazzoletto, with the letter L embroidered on it, which is supposedly a secret signal for all of the mafia to rise up and help the Americans and take over all the towns in Italy. And that story is a bunch of propaganda, because the real invasion of Sicily was much more run by the army than anything that the ONI had set up. And this is something I need to look more into, because it does appear to me that the ONI, being so attached to President Roosevelt, may also have been setting the stage for what later became the French Connection. Now, I'm a Navy boy, and I love the Navy, and I don't want to say anything against the ONI, but the evidence seems to be point in their direction and not in that of the Army or the OSS at that time, strangely enough. But that's for another day. So Max Corvo, an interesting character, and from Connecticut, and you should look into him. He's got a lot of interesting connections. Okay, and then there's the Purge. Okay, that's something that also we have to take into account in our historical understanding. Was that when FDR died, the OSS was purged, and it was purged of anybody that would oppose Allen Dulles. And obviously, Max Corvo was one of them. And what was Allen Dulles doing but facilitating the rat lines and the dope? Essential to Angleton's activities, to the establishment of the first stay-behind units in Italy, and to the organization of the Vatican-linked rat lines from which smuggled fascists out of Europe at the war's end, was the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, the SMOM. The Rome-based SMOM was a nominally Catholic organization with membership drawn from the highest ranks of the European oligarchy, in particular Italy's black nobility. The SMOM awarded Angleton one of its highest decorations in 1946. A member of the Black Prince's family, S. Giacomo, Prince Borghese, had been a bailiff Grand Cross of Honor of Devotion in the SMOM since 1932, while P2 founder Licio Gelli and several of his top members, including Secret Service heads, also belonged. So now, again, this opens something up to me that makes so much sense, because I never knew who was in the SMOMs, and there's so many different branches and subparts, and some of them went to Russia, and some of them, they have the Anglican SMOMs now, and as well as the. So, what is an SMOM? Well, it is a aristocrat of a very high rank, traditionally, and you had to be noble to be in the SMOMs. It's the descendant of the Templars, and these, of course, are the non-first sons of the nobility, the ones that didn't inherit under uh, primogeniture. And so they had to make their own way, and they did it in an oligarchical fashion. So now we have the SMOMs identified as the same people, the nobility, the high nobility, bloodlines, absolute bloodlines, except when it became convenient to the church to want to have some Americans in that secret society where you can get a passport and run diplomatic missions with diplomatic briefcases and diplomatic shipping crates, if not entire ships. The whole thing is a rat line and a banking system off the books. And they do have a little bit of territory, a city block, I mean, less than a city block in Rome and that's their sovereign territory, if you believe that. So now we know that when you see the S-moms in America, these are appendages to the aristocratic European S-moms, and you can see that they would be chosen due to their affinity for the aristocracy and wanting to be equal with the European nobility, just basis on their old families, the old wealth of America's establishment. By 1949, Angleton was a special assistant to CIA Chief Admiral Roscoe Hillenkotter, and by 1955, CIA Chief Allen Dulles had appointed him to head the counterintelligence department of the CIA. He held that post until he was fired by CIA Chief William Colby in 1974 after having done untold damage to U.S. intelligence capabilities. As Angleton rose in the U.S. intelligence, maintaining his close ties to Italy, NATO was constructing the foundations of Gladio. Under NSC, National Security Council directives issued in 1949 and 1950, the CIA helped the Italian police set up secret units of counterinsurgency specialists, largely drawn from veterans of Mussolini's secret police. A new military intelligence agency, CFAR, was organized under the direction of a covert American intelligence operative, Carmel Offee, nicknamed the Godfather. Simultaneously, Borghese was organizing paramilitary units for use against the PCI, that's the Italian Communist Party, in coordination with CIA operatives under the purview of Angleton, who was formally assigned to Italy by Allen Dulles when Dulles became CIA chief in 1953. So there you have the Anglophile Dulles assigning the Anglophile Angleton to oversee the Gladio operation in Italy. Simultaneously, Borghese was organizing paramilitary units for use against the PCI in coordination with CIA operatives under the purview of Angleton. On December 2nd, 1951, Borghese was named honorary president of the MSI, and in a speech to the party's convention proclaimed that the MSI could not be, quote, conscientious objectors if the Cold War turned hot, as he expected. That same month, two MSI members traveled to NATO headquarters in Paris to swear their organization's allegiance to NATO. By 1952, the NATO-directed Operation Demagnetize was in place, and CFAR was directed to adopt political and psychological operations against the PCI, including the covert use of armed force to diminish the PCI's influence in all fields. The United States poured a staggering $4 billion into anti-communist Italy between 1948 and 1953. Borghese and his old Decima Mas cadre figured prominently in these plans. Indeed, some people in U.S. intelligence had briefly toyed with the idea of promoting Borghese as a new king of Italy, until an uproar from the House of Savoy and its supporters forced them to drop this idea. The Royalists and the MSI were often allies, and Borghese's Decima Mas had sometimes worked with the Royalist Osopo Brigade during the war. Green and Massignani observed that, quote, interestingly enough, the core of the future Gladio stay-behind organization started with the Osopo partisans. Since Borghese's Decima Mas was also a chief recruiting ground for the early Gladio units, the wartime collaboration clearly continued. In 1953, Borghese led some 500 MSI volunteers, along with others, to launch an uprising in the North Adriatic city of Trieste, a city which was claimed by both Italy and Yugoslavia. Under the slogan, "To Trieste with Valerio Borghese," Borghese reenacted the 1919 March on Fiume by the fascist and Martinist Freemason Gabriele D'Annunzio, a precursor to Mussolini's 1922 March on Rome. The neo-fascists acted on behalf of the, quote, Committee for the Defense of Italians of Trieste and Istria, whose weapons were delivered by the Italian Secret Service. The following year, Trieste was returned to Italy. In 1955, Borghese became president of the Union of Former Soldiers of the Salois Republic, a key recruiting ground for Gladio. He was later to become one of the leaders of the Tricolor Committee for the Italianate of the Alto Adige. The Alto Adige, or South Tyrol in Italy, saw one of the earliest known uses of stay-behind units. Though Italian territory, the area was German-speaking and a fruitful area for promoting ethnic conflict. Well, run out of time, so we're going to have to stop there. I'll be continuing this article from EIR the next time I do a installment of this series about synarchy. Thank you very much for your attention. I do thank everyone for considering supporting our channel by going to screamingospreys.com and push the Patreon button. You can join for any amount whatsoever. Our donations are down a little bit from previous years, so I would appreciate if you can toss in $5 or $10. It would be very helpful. At this time, well, thanks again for being with me, and we will see you tonight with David Cranmer Underdown for an update on his research into the elite families and corporations of the United States.